Good morning. In this part of the webinar, we will talk about further entrepreneurial skills. This time, we'll discuss communication and teamwork. The content of this topic is as follows. First, we'll talk about the communication process itself, so how it looks like and what elements it consists of. Then we'll give you some tips on how to communicate effectively. In the next section, we'll talk about communication in a group and presenting in front of the group, so how to prepare for it well. Then we'll discuss teamwork. We'll explain what the team is, and in the final part, we'll talk about group roles according to Bellby. In order to consider how to communicate effectively, it is worth discussing the communication process itself at the beginning. Here we'll talk about the elements that make up this process. For the communication process to take place, we need a sender. This is a person who sends a message, the creator of the message. On the other side, we have a receiver, so the person who receives the message from the sender. The channel through which the message is transmitted is also important in the communication process. It can be a written or oral channel. What happens in the communication process? On the sender's side, the message is encoded, so the sender's thoughts are converted into a message. The signs, gestures, emails, text messages, or other forms of messages. On the receiver's side, the reverse process takes place, so decoding of the information. So the receiver reads, sees the message and gives it meaning, interprets it. Unfortunately, difficulties often arise in the communication process. We call them noise or barriers. These factors can disrupt the communication process, causing the receiver to misunderstand the sender and misinterpret the message. The final element of the communication process is feedback. It allows the receiver to check whether they have understood the message correctly. Feedback is especially useful when there have been disruptions in the communication process. In such cases, making sure that the receiver has understood the sender correctly can help to ensure effective communication. Now that we know what communication process consists of, let's consider how we can communicate effectively in both our professional and private lives. The first tip is to be precise in what we communicate. This is a mistake to assume that our interlocutor will guess what we mean. Often, our conversation partner has a different perspective, different experiences, different association with what we communicate. So they may not understand us exactly. They may misinterpret the message. So it is worth expressing ourselves clearly so that there is no doubt about what we mean. Furthermore, if we are communicating with someone outside of our professional field or area of interest, we should make sure that we use terms that our interlocutor understands. It is a mistake to use expressions or terminology that may be unclear to our conversation partner. Thirdly, it is also worth checking the reliability of information so that we do not pass the message that we are not sure it's true. In such a situation, it is worth reaching the original source of the information. Another piece of advice is to choose a good place and time for important conversations. If we intend to give our colleague important feedback or detailed information about a client, it is worth finding the right conditions for such an important conversation. Another tip for communicating effectively is to confirm important arrangements in writing. For example, after conversation about important project at work, it is worth confirming the most important arrangements by email. A general rule in communication is also to make sure that our message has reached the receiver. The fact that we have sent it does not always mean that it has reached the receiver, as sometimes we may have some technical problems sending the email, for example. What's more, it is important to use paraphrasing to make sure we've understood our conversation partner correctly. What else is worth paying attention in order to communicate effectively? First, focus on your conversation partner and show interest in what they are communicating. Second, do not interrupt your conversation partner, but calmly let them finish their sentence. Also, remember to make sure you have understood your conversation partner correctly. If you have any doubts, it is worth asking additional questions to better understand the topic. These tips can be particularly important in situations when we have an important conversation about our private or professional matters. Group communication can also be an element of communication issue. For example, a presentation in front of your team at work. Information on how to prepare for it may be useful when we are preparing a presentation for your team on a new project or for our clients on a new product, for example. At the beginning of presentation preparation, it is worth answering the 7 questions you can see on this slide. First question is who. So who we are during this presentation, who we represent. For example, ourselves, our department, our organization, our company. Second, who we are communicating with. So who our audience is. What our audience can expect from our presentation. It is also worth considering whether our audience is generally familiar with the topic we want to present. Thirdly, let's ask ourselves about the purpose of the presentation. So, do we want to convince someone to something? Do we want to present, discuss, or summarize something? What do we want our audience to take away, to remember from our presentation? The next question concerns the content of the presentation. So, what do we want to communicate? What's the most important? Let's also consider what methods and tools we will use during our presentation. So, will we hand out any written materials, or will we prepare a multimedia presentation? Let's also consider the issue of time. How much time do we have for a presentation, and how much time do we have to prepare for it? Of course, it is worth starting your presentation in advance. The last question concerns the venue for the presentation. Will it be a conference room in your company or organization, or a familiar place? Consider how the venue is equipped and whether you are familiar with this place. What else might be important when preparing for a presentation? First, it is worth familiarizing yourself with the topic you will be presenting, as you can reduce your level of stress and make you feel more confident. It is also worth considering what questions you might have from the audience so that you can prepare your answers in advance. What is more, try to use shorter sentences than in written communication and use repetition and summaries. It is also worth adding examples, quotes, questions to the audience to make it easier for them to understand the topic. Once the presentation is ready, it's a good idea to practice in front of the mirror or other people. If you are not familiar with the venue where you will be presenting, it's a good idea to rehearse there beforehand. You can also record your presentation in different visual conditions, so then you can check it later and correct any mistakes. Just before the presentation, please check all equipment and materials. If you are using a multimedia presentation, make sure it works. Remember that every audience member should be able to see both your multimedia presentation, so the screen, and your sign language clearly from every seat in the room. At the beginning of the presentation, please do not forget to introduce yourself, the topic of the presentation. You can also encourage the group to ask questions. Now let's move on to the second skill discussed in this topic, which is teamwork. First, let's explain what a team is. As you can see on the slide, it's a small group of people who have complementary skills. The point here is that not everyone in the team needs to know everything, but it is important that the skills of the team members complement each other. Another feature of the team is that they have a common goal to achieve, share common work standards, and feel responsible for the results. Now that we know what a team is, let's discuss how to work effectively as a team. First, it is worth specifying what the team's goals is and what criteria for achieving it are. In other words, how will you know when your goal has been achieved? Once you know what the goal is as a team, it is worth considering what resources are needed to achieve it. Resources include time, tools, materials, budget, knowledge, etc. Consider which of these resources you already have, which you still need, and how to get them. Then plan specific stages for achieving a goal. In other words, divide the achievement of the goal into smaller parts. When you divide individual tasks among team members, it is worth taking into account their personal skills and competences. It would be great if each team member did what they are good at, so that their natural talents can be utilized. While working, it is of course worth monitoring the results and available resources. Once the goal has been achieved, it is of course worth checking whether the goals have been achieved according to the criteria for success. When working in a team, it's natural for team members to take on different roles, being better in some areas and weaker in others. One of the typologies describing group roles was developed by Belby. The author and his team identified 9 group roles. They were divided into 3 types: social roles, thinking roles, and action roles. Among the first social roles are resource investigator, team worker, and coordinator. The thinking group roles includes plat, monitor evaluator, and specialist. The action roles, on the other hand, include shaper, implementer, and completer finisher. It is worth familiarizing yourself with the characteristic of each of these roles and considering which ones suit you best, what you bring to the team, what your strengths are and can support teamwork. To sum up, in this topic you have learned about the process and principles of effective communication. We also discussed tips on how to prepare for a presentation, and in the final part, we talk about rules of teamwork and touch the topic of group roles. We hope that this information has helped you to develop your skills. Thank you very much for your attention.